Hello, I'm Jack Kandig with Graco Industrial Lubrication Equipment, and in this video I'm going to show you how to connect the GLCX controller to a Compact Dyna-Star that's configured for a series progressive divider valve system, and specifically using the 14-pin connector kit that we sell to build your own wiring harness that connects directly to the controller and to the pump motor, the low-level switch, and also to a proximity switch that you're going to put on your series progressive divider valve. So let's see how that's done. This kit that we sell for the AMPSEAL connector, again, includes the connector housing itself, the terminals, and some white plugs. The plugs are a little bit different. We'll get to that later. Another thing that is different is these AMPSEAL connectors are a stamped out terminal. They're not machined ones like the Deutsch pins that we sell. And there are Deutsch pins that are stamped out as well, but the ones in our kits are all those machined ones. So they use that crimper I demonstrated. And speaking of crimpers, let's talk tools for a minute. This one is a little bit of a cheaper crimper that I just got online. And I'm gonna try to show here that there are still gaps. There you can see the gaps within the jaw. And that just makes for some sloppy crimping. You can make it work, but this is what I ended up with. It looks kind of sad, and I'm gonna have to straighten that out at some point if I want to use it. Now, this is just the white wire I cut off, so I'm just gonna trash that. Here is a different crimper that has a much tighter fit in its jaw, and I've found it to be a lot more useful, and it works pretty well. One thing these guys have in common with the DT pins is that they are, again, for a 16 to 20 gauge wire. This is probably a 22 gauge or something similar. So I've actually cut off double length and put my fold here. So I actually have this metal folded over. We're going to slide this in here. And another thing here, this has this piece that actually grabs onto the insulation. So you have to be a little bit careful about the length of wire that you're stripping so that you don't strip off too much. And I'm going to find the smallest part of this crimper, and I'm just going to put this in here. And I want to make sure that these tabs are up there now, and I squeeze it. There's this texture inside of the jaw where there's a little kind of an M shape up at the top, if you can see that. And that's what gave me my nice crimp here with my folded over wire. That's not going anywhere, but we're not done yet because of this piece that has to grab the insulation. So another thing I like about this crimper is it actually has two round slots here that I can start my bending and get some of a bend on that. So I've kind of started the bend on this wire, and then I just need to go back over to that same slot again and finish the job. Oop, got to get it in there right though. There, now that has grabbed onto the wire and the insulator. Now it's still a little bit crooked, not as bad as that other one. So before I let go, what I'm gonna do is, let me put this back in here because I skipped that step. I'm actually gonna just hold it here firmly and push it gently. And now it is pretty straight. So real quickly, let me just do the other one to reinforce a little bit. I've got my wire folded over. Let's get that in the space. Get this in our crimper in the smallest spot here. Now that's tight. Let's round this guy off. And now let's give him a squeeze. Oh, I gotta make sure my insulators are lined up there. Okay. Give him a squeeze with the crimping part. Now that it's tight, this time I'm going to remember not to let go. I'm going to just push it a little bit. And there we have a nice straight connector. So now we are ready to consult our wiring diagram again to see which wire goes where. Now we're going to start building our connector. This is one of the rare connectors that you can actually see the numbers on. So we've got a 1 and a 5, and we've got a 10 and a 14. So we know it's 1 through 5, 6 through 9, in the middle there, and then 10 through 14 along the bottom. And up on this diagram, we also have a number 1 and a number 14 for reference, so we know that we're actually looking at this from the same perspective, which, as we discussed with some of our Deutsch wiring, that's pretty important. And then we have our wiring diagrams over here for the individual cables, And we're still going to use this piece to tell us what goes where, because these numbers on these color-coded wires coordinate with the numbers up here. And then these are also color coordinated. So there's a lot of guidance on this. If you can't bring it with you digitally, it would be really good to ask the boss to use the color printer up in the office and print this out on an 11 by 17 if you can, but even on just a letter size piece of paper, it'd be a nice guide to have with you. And if you find that you use it a lot, you may even want to just laminate a copy and keep it in your toolbox. Before we can put any wires in here though, we need to release this red locking wedge. And you don't want to pry on these little tabs because it's really easy to break them. And if you break them, you basically need a new one. And so you don't want to be wasting parts that way. The best thing is just to get into this little space here and pry and work around from side to side until it pops out. Now, normally you're going to want to leave this in here where there's just the one click and it's sitting up, because these little diamond shaped pieces inside here actually provide some stability and structure inside of this thing. And if you get too many of the connectors inserted in here, it'll be really hard to put the diamond pieces on these and line them up. But I do want to take it out for a minute, because the easiest thing to insert is actually the power cable. And so we're going to put brown into number 1 because that shows red here. And if you remember from the previous segment, the red wire was the positive for the pump, and so is the brown on this harness. And that one, you can tell when it's supposed to stop. It's pretty obvious. And then the other one that goes with this, if we read from last time, we were using our negative motor to down to number 5. Number 5 on the Deutsch was number 3, black. And that's going to be this one here. So that one goes in really easily. The tricky one is actually the incoming power that you're going to be hooking up to your 24-volt power source. And that even has its own little piece right here to show you that you're going to have white on a fused positive line, and that goes to number 6. And then black's going to go next to it on number 10. These cables that we use, I'm just using another cable that I got off of a different unit that has the kind of the standard Graco power cable that we use on a lot of our 24-volt units. It's a nice supple wire, so that's great when you're routing it, but it means it's a little bit sloppy when it's just a lead here. And so what I do a lot of times is give it a good twist to get that metal in there to spiral and stack up. So then it will be a little bit easier to give it some insertion force. So now 6 is right next to number 1 where we have our brown. So let's get that in there. And the reason I wanted this top off was so that I could see when I'm far enough in, because this one is a little bit more difficult and tricky, and I want to make sure I'm in far enough. And I'm actually going to grab a little needle nose pliers here, because this was still starting to kind of fight me on it. And I'm going to get that in here and push this up until it goes in. It is a bugger. And one thing while I'm fighting this, I want to comment that if anybody has suggestions on how to do things that I demonstrate in a better way, I am all ears. You can post a comment on the YouTube video comment section, or you can send an email to your local account manager, or if you know me and have my email address, feel free to shoot me an email too. So now that one looks like it's flush with the 2 that we know are good. And so now we're going to go over to the corner here and put our black one in the corner, which is position number 10. And we're just going to do that kind of the same way. Make sure it's flush. And it's going to fight me too, because it just doesn't like being pushed. It's like pushing a rope. One thing you really don't want to do, even though it's tempting, is to reach in here and try to pull these out with a needle nose, because these things are pretty thin and they will deform. So don't do that. Just keep working on it from the back side and just keep pushing it in. And there we go. We got it eventually. So now, like I was saying, if you put too many of these terminals in, it's going to be hard to line up these little diamond slots. So before I put the 6 small wires in, I'm just going to set that on there. I got my faint click on each side, and it's still loose enough that we can put our wires in, but now the diamonds are lined up with the pins that we already inserted. The thing I want to make sure now is that we're working our way outward, and anything that goes in the middle, we're going to do first so that we don't kind of box ourselves out around the edges here. But I also don't want to push that red thing in all the way. Number 7 is something we're not actually going to use this time. That is the ground for a vent valve or an alarm output, and I'm not hooking up either one of those this time. Number 8 is actually the ground for the low level. So let's do that next. I'm going to use the black cable for my low level again, just to stay consistent within this video. But like I was saying before, it doesn't matter what color your M12 cables are as long as you keep track of them. And now we're going to have that green number 8 is pin 2 on the Deutsch, which is the blue one. So now I'm going to put my blue low level into pin number 8. These guys aren't usually too bad because even though they're thin, they still slide in pretty easily. That one actually went in too far. So now the next one, we want to see what number 9 is, and that's the brown, and it's number 3 on the Deutsch, which is black on my low level wire. So we're going to put that next to the blue in that middle row. So again, I'm working on number 9 here. So I did 8 and now 9. And this is the same kind of thing here where it's pretty easy to push in. And there I could kind of see that I think I actually went too far on that one too. Now number 5 is the orange one, and that we remember was the number 1 on the Deutsch connector. And so that now is our brown. And so I'm going to put brown into number 5. Get that till it clicks. In the process of recording this video, I actually managed to find a way to break these things. Notice the fingers inside here, the latching fingers. Some of them look okay, but some of them are damaged, which means they're not going to properly perform their function anymore. The way I broke these was by forcing the red locking wedge back into place when I had some of these extended in too far. So like I said, when I was inserting these wires, a couple of them actually went in too far, and you can see that they're sitting above the flush. So if that happens and you're here with your red locking wedge in place, you're going to just have to pull it off by hand, get in here, and try not to move all of the pins around, because that's where you run into trouble with the diamond shaped slots here, is that if this doesn't line up when it goes back on, you end up having to fight it, and you could break something that way too. So just get in here with a screwdriver or something like that and pry back one side of the locking fingers and push that back in. Get it flush. Now this one's out of position. I'm gonna just pull on the wire a little bit from the back side and see if that helps. Okay, so that actually seated it, but you end up having to kind of play around with it. And I would suggest that you stop after each of the M12 cables that you're doing so that you don't have all the wires at once out of position, because now I can put this back on, get it to my 1-click position, and I know that they're all situated in there inside of those diamond shaped grooves. So now I can move on to connecting my proc switch wire, and I'll do the same thing. Whereas I proceed through the correct positions for the proc switch, if I put it in too far, I'll just do all 3 of them. And then if any of them are in too far, I'll pull the red locking wedge off at that time and make sure everything's right. And here I can actually even see now that my black wanted to pull out too far. So back here, I'm going to push that back in, and now it's in a good spot. So when you're prying with the screwdriver, just make sure you don't break those little fingers in there. All that's left now is my proc switch. We're going to want to look for 6, 7, and 11 again. 6 is green 13. 7 is yellow 4. The black wire, number 11, is the slate, which is still coincidentally 11 on this guy too. So while that's still fresh in my mind, let's just put our black in number 11 here. Green 13, which is the blue one. So that's going to be near the corner, but not quite. The second from the last on the bottom row. And then our last wire now to connect is brown, which is number 7 on the Deutsch, but number 4 on the AMPSEAL. So that's up here in this top row, the one remaining right up here. So there, now I have them all in. And now with all of the terminals in place and the red locking wedge pressed down, I actually want to look and make sure that I can see the terminal at the end of each of these slots, where we do have a few open ones that we don't need to worry about. But that black one I especially wanted to keep an eye on because it kept wanting to slip out. And now that the locking wedge is here, I can pull on the black. So this black one, it's not going anywhere. It's actually this one over here now that the locking wedge is on. So this is good, except for there is one last step that I want to mention. These white plugs. On the Deutsch connector, we had to use the plugs for any open positions. On the AMPSEAL, another nice feature of the AMPSEAL is actually there is a membrane inside each hole that only gets opened when you push a pin through it. So if you never push a terminal or a pin in through one of these holes, you don't need to plug it when you're done. So really, these are just for mistakes. And so that you do get a little forgiveness if you accidentally put your pin in the wrong hole or your terminal and you decide it needed to go somewhere else. Then when you're done, you should put one of these plugs in that hole just to make sure you keep it free of water ingress. And they're pretty straightforward. Clearly, it's just a plug that has a taper on it. So if we wanted to plug this hole here in the middle, just push it in. And it's going to go in all the way, and that's that. But again, you don't have to do that unless you accidentally punctured that membrane by putting your terminal in the wrong spot. So this guy's done, and we can proceed to test it. I'm going to give it the 24 volts. Looks like our power cables are good because our red light came on pretty much immediately. And now I'm going to test my low level first, just because that's convenient. There's my amber light for the low level. You can see that on the controller there. And I'm going to let go of my low level. And now with the switch open, there we go. The alert went away. I'll test the motor in a moment. Here, let's test our proc switch. Hit manual run. We've got our signals coming in. Excellent. So our proc switch is good. And since this is the easiest thing to hook up, I'm going to assume that our motor is good, but it's not safe to assume things. Let's plug that in. Hit manual run again. There it goes. The motor's alive and kicking. So let's stop that and disconnect it. We have a good wiring harness now. So the AMPSEAL is another option for you. If you don't have an AMPSEAL crimper, they're about $250 last time I checked, US dollars that is, and it will make the job quicker for you. But if you can find a good, just regular old wire crimper that has a nice tight fit, you can get away on the cheap. So here's another option for you for wiring the GLC controller to a Compact Dyna-Star pump when you're going to be hooking up a proximity switch for a series progressive divider valve system. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you have any questions about the GLC controller, the Compact Dyna-Star pump, or any other Graco product, please feel free to contact us. We are always happy to hear from you.